clock, which is right in front of me, and I invite Karen Smythe to the podium to begin her opening remarks.
Shorter than everybody else. Good morning, Dutchess County Regional Chamber of Commerce. Good morning. Glad to know you're all awake. Thank you to the Chamber, and thank you to the Mid-Hudson Regional Hospital for sponsoring today's breakfast. In this, the Year of the Veteran, I would like to start by saying thank you to all the veterans in the room and to all the veterans everywhere. And while every year should be the Year of the Veteran, I'm thrilled that Dutchess County will be recognizing the service and sacrifice of all our veterans that allow us to live in this great democracy. I come from a family with several military members, a grandfather who was a 3-star general, an uncle who was a lieutenant colonel, my father-in-law was a staff sergeant, and a brother-in-law who was a Navy lieutenant commander. I am committed to supporting our veterans, and I hope to see all of you at the Year of the Veteran Parade on September 30th. As Frankie said, my name is Karen Smythe. My name is Karen Strain Smythe. My family has been part of the Dutchess County for 4 generations, and up until 6 years ago, we owned and operated CB Strain & Son, a union mechanical contracting firm which has employed hundreds of union employees for generations. I would like to recognize my father, Dick Strain, who's sitting over here, who followed his father into the business and has made many contributions to this community. I'd also like to recognize my husband, another community supporter many of you know, Neville Smythe. Who I am blessed to be married to, and it will be 27 years tomorrow.
Wow.
From working as a front desk clerk at a Holiday Inn, to being a marketing executive, to running my family's business, and now running to represent you in the state Senate, I believe I'm the best prepared candidate to help Dutchess and Putnam economies grow and support our local business community. When I look around this room, I see many of the people who make this community great by providing employment, by giving back, by caring. When I look outside this room, I see people who, for many reasons, are not as fortunate. As your state senator, I want to help everyone in the community to be able to have opportunities to work hard and be successful. I want to help ensure affordability for both businesses and our residents. I want to see us grow an economy that creates greater opportunities for as many people in our community as possible. And I believe that it will take all of us in the business community of all political stripes working together to achieve this. I welcome this opportunity to answer questions and share thoughts on how we can work together to improve how government works for us. Thank you.
I now invite Senator Sue Serino to the podium for her opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the Chamber for hosting this event. It's so exciting to see so many people here that actually care about our community. I thank you for taking the time, because I know it is your time away from work, and I really appreciate it. It's been an honor to serve as your state senator for the past 4 years. If some of you don't know me, I cover most of Dutchess and part of Putnam County. I'm also chair of the Aging Committee, and like my son likes to say, my last name, Serino, and Senior have the same letter, so I feel it's been my destiny and my honor. And I chair the Lyme Task Force as well. Before serving as your state senator, I served on the Hyde Park Town Board, and I also served on the Dutchess County Legislature. I know firsthand how different government can be from the public sector. Many of you know my story. I started working at the age of 15, because I needed to help my mom. Worked as a waitress, a manager, until eventually I owned my own business, my real estate business. And that's actually what got me involved. As many of you know, if you're a small business owner, it's all the rules, regulations, and red tape. So for somebody who never paid attention to politics, I jumped in, and I'm so glad that I did. Not a career politician, I firmly believe in term limits. You sent me to Albany to shake things up, and I have. I've spent the last 4 years listening to each and every one of you. As a result, this year, I stood strong against the governor's budget proposal to raise taxes and fees by $1 billion. And the Assembly, in their budget proposal, had $2 billion in taxes and fees. And in the budget, over the next few years, there would be spending of taxes and fees of $20 billion. That's unacceptable. I fought to continue the tax cut that will result in the lowest middle class tax rate in 70 years. I have secured unprecedented funding for our local schools, roads and bridges, law enforcement, municipalities, and water infrastructure. And all of these things, when we bring that money home, it helps all of our supervisors in the room keep the taxes low, our county executive. I've worked on legislation to combat Lyme disease, the terrible heroin epidemic. We've lost way too many young people. Sexual harassment, child abuse, and elder abuse. I've stood up against Albany's corruption. This year, it's amazing, we successfully passed legislation to strip corrupt elected officials of their taxpayer-funded pensions. And that's a cut for you. We had to pass that twice, and then it went out to the voters, and your voices were heard. But most important, I've worked to make sure that our community here is a priority in the eyes of New York State. Together, we have accomplished some incredible things, but there is still work to be done. I look forward to taking your questions today about how we can do that. Thank you.
Okay, get that applause out of your system. Now we will begin with question number 1, and that will be answered by Karen Smythe. Skilled labor is a big challenge for business. New York spends more than $22,000 per pupil on K through 12 education and spent 90% more than US average. Yet, we are ranked 31st in the nation in quality of education and 5 percentage points behind the national average for graduation rates. As Senator, how do you propose to lower the cost per pupil and increase the quality of education that students receive?
So thank you for that question. Education is something that I am particularly passionate about because I think it is the foundation of our community and our society. And I'm thrilled that there's some Poughkeepsie High School students here today. I think that in order to improve something, you need to start with the people who are on the firing line, who are right there in the classroom. So it starts with working with the teachers and saying, what is it that we're doing wrong? Where are the inefficiencies? Where can we make the improvements? I think we need to work with the local school districts and come together and say, how can we make things work better? I think there's an inefficiency and an inequity in where we put our funding. I think if you were to look from district to district, the money is not evenly dispersed. And so to say that it's high, that may not be true in every school district. And so I think all of that is something that takes the community coming together and working to find ways to improve the systems that we have. Some of the school districts we have are doing tremendously well, others not so well. And we need to look and understand what those issues are. And I think some of them are based on issues within the community, not just within the school system. And so that is how I would approach improving our school system.
Senator, skilled labor is a big challenge for business, and New York spends more than $22,000 per pupil on K through 12 education and spent 90% more than the US average. Yet we're ranked 31st in the nation in quality of education, 5 percentage points behind the national average for graduation rates. As Senator, how do you propose to lower the cost per pupil and increase the quality of education that students receive?
Thank you, Frank. You know, one of the first things I did when I came into office was form an education advisory committee. And that was so important because I listened to the teachers, the principals, neighbors that are all invested in our community to tell me what we need to do. Common Core was a big issue, right? Our kids were struggling with that. And Common Core does not exist today as it did before. The federal government changed the amount of testing. It's age appropriate. We got rid of the gag order. There are so many important things that our children can succeed. It's great to see the children that are here from Poughkeepsie High School. The Chamber's been involved in going into the high school for workforce development, not only in Poughkeepsie, but Wappingers. They host days for the kids to see what jobs are available. I had a youth roundtable with local college students to see what can we do to keep you here. And it was amazing because they said it's jobs, but look at what's happening with our cities here. The kids are able to go and see if they can get jobs. We have all the employers here. I think we need to do better with our kids to engage them with the employers of the small businesses, and just talking to the children and seeing what they need too. So thank you.
Okay, hold your applause till the end, please. The next question will go to Senator Serino. The question comes from participants in the My Brother's Keeper program here in the city of Poughkeepsie High School. One of the My Brother's Keeper program milestones are for young men of color to graduate from high school, career and college ready. As Senator, what supportive measures and programs can you bring to the City of Poughkeepsie School District to aid in the future success of these students?
Yeah, My Brother's Keeper had a great forum here, and it was so fascinating listening to some of the children and some of the obstacles that they had to get through. And we do supply funding for My Brother's Keeper. I think it's so important to encourage young people, give them a lift up, and I think it's an excellent program. So thank you.
This question comes from participants of the My Brother's Keeper program in the city of Poughkeepsie High School. One of the My Brother's Keeper program milestones are for young men of color to graduate from high school, career and college ready. As Senator, what supportive measures and programs can you bring to the city of Poughkeepsie School District to aid in future success of these students?
So one of the things that I like to talk about is to provide students with an awareness and to know what all the opportunities are for different careers. When I was growing up, you either wanted to be a policeman, a fireman, or a lawyer, I think it was. And there's so many options. There's so many things that you can do that are good careers. For example, when I was running CB Strain, we had incredible workers who had tremendous trade skills, and it leads to a really good job and a career. The unions have phenomenal apprenticeship programs. What I'd like to do is to introduce earlier into the school program. For some, this is bringing something back that used to be there, but trade training to expose students to what the trades might be. So if that's something that a student sees themselves doing, they can see that pathway. And there are other opportunities. And that leads to joint efforts with the business community, perhaps the unions, and the schools to perhaps come up with internship programs for the summer so that the students can understand what it's like to work in a particular industry or in a particular type of business. I think that's just enhancing some of the programs that do exist but are very small. But those are the kinds of programs that I would love to bring to the City of Poughkeepsie schools. So thank you for that question.
Okay, Karen. State Bill 2975 would impose Public Works prevailing wage standards on most private sector projects receiving any level of financial support from the state and local entities, including loans, grants, tax abatements, and others. The bill also includes a vast list of all work deemed construction, running the full gamut from pre-planning to survey to construction. A passing of this legislation is estimated to drive up the cost of private sector projects upwards to 30 to 35% above current levels. Would you support or oppose this bill, and why?
So I'll start by saying I haven't read the specific details of that bill, so I can't say whether I would oppose or support it specifically as that bill. However, I am very familiar with prevailing wage because that is something that certainly that we worked with at CB Strain all the time. So to me, when there's public money involved in a project, it makes sense to have it be prevailing wage and to have appropriate oversight of that money, because it is public money. Whether it is a grant, whether it is tax abatement, it is all related to public money. At the same time, we need to be respectful of the costs, because that is also, it is a cost that is borne by all of us. But I would say that by paying prevailing wage, it's helping to pay living wages, and those wages go directly back into our communities. So if we are hiring our local people and we are paying them a prevailing wage, they then come back to the community and spend that money, which then makes for the circle of everyone being successful and everyone rising up. So that is my answer to that question.
Okay. Sue, Senate Bill 2975 would impose public works prevailing wage standards on most private sector projects receiving any level of financial support from the state or local entities, including loans, grants, tax abatements, and others. The bill also includes a vast list of all work deemed construction, running the full gamut of pre-planning, survey, to construction. A passing of this legislation is estimated to drive up the cost of private sector projects upwards of 30 to 35% above current levels. Would you support or oppose this bill, and why?
Thank you, Frankie. First of all, I believe in a skilled workforce. And when we were talking about skilled workforce and you look at the different opportunities, I just want to mention about the previous question, like Arlington High School has some great programs. We have STEM programs, so many wonderful opportunities. But I chair the Aging Committee. I know we have a lot of not-for-profits here right in this room. Prevailing wage would directly impact them. That's taxpayer-funded dollars. I have a situation where I have a not-for-profit that needs money for a furnace. What are they supposed to do when you have the prevailing wage? We keep driving the costs up and driving people out of New York State. There has to be a balance. There has to be oversight. I think this is so much bigger of a question that I think really needs careful consideration, because our taxpayers can't afford to have the burden on their back anymore. But at the same time, we have to balance having a skilled workforce. So thank you very much for that question.
Hey, Sue, the next question is also for you. This one comes from the audience. With the governor pushing hard to require businesses to provide new and increased employee benefits, how do you balance enhancing workers' rights versus a sustainable business environment in which small businesses, often with limited resources, can flourish and be successful?
Thank you very much, Frank. And as you know, as a small business owner, that's why I got involved in politics. And this year, we were able to protect the $4.2 billion income tax cut for small businesses. That's a major tax relief. We stopped new taxes and fees proposed by the governor in the assembly. We kept spending under 2% taxes. We made new investments in workforce development and initiatives that led to real paying jobs. So often you'll see in government, like when the minimum wage came up, that's a burden. We want a living wage, right? But we also have all of our small businesses in this room. The governor was on a drive for 15. He had the cars out there. So I came and I asked many of our chamber members to get together and said, okay, this is going to happen. He did it with the fast food workers. What's going to work for you guys? You came together and you said if it was $12.50 over a longer period, or $12 over a longer period of time, you could do that. We were able to negotiate, and this was huge because it separated New York City from upstate New York, right? That's a tremendous help because New York City is going to the $15 in 3 hours, but up here, it'll be $12.50 over a 5-year period. So that was a major win for us. It's those kind of things that we have to think of. You quite often hear me say, Albany lives in a bubble, and I tell them they have to come back to their districts and see people are suffering. People are still working paycheck to paycheck. I mean, our economy's doing better, but that's still happening. So we have to keep that in mind with every single decision that we make. Thank you.
Karen, with the governor pushing hard to require businesses to provide new and increased employee benefits, How do you balance enhancing workers' rights versus creating a sustainable business environment in which small businesses, often with limited resources, can flourish and be successful?
So as we all know, our businesses are run with all of us and all of our workers. And so it's really important to make sure that our workers have a living wage and have benefits that enable them to be fully present and prepared to work as hard as they all do everywhere. Most issues have different aspects. Any legislation or any regulation, often there are unintended consequences. And we need to be making sure that every regulation that we have has a purpose, the purpose makes sense, and it is implemented appropriately. And I think there are many instances of regulations now that need to be looked at and adjusted to make sure that the ultimate purpose is being achieved, but that the other unintended consequences are removed. And I think it's also true that for a business that is in competition, we need to make sure that the playing field is level. We can't say that one place has to provide this and another doesn't. And so I think that's another reason why regulations are important. Worker safety is critical, and so those regulations need to be carefully thought out. However, there is always an opportunity to do it better. There's always an opportunity to remove some costs that don't need to be there. And all of that needs to be looked at and reviewed and taken into consideration when we're dealing with legislation.
Karen, the next topic is on the wage tip credit. New York State Department of Labor has held public hearings on the abolishment of the wage tip credit for tipped employees here in New York State. What is your position on this issue?
So this is another issue that would be nice if it were simple. I've yet to find an issue that is truly simple when you look at the details. For me, eliminating the tipped wage, in the hospitality industry, there are many employees who receive tips, and they get a lower than minimum wage base salary, if you will, and then they make up the difference with tips. In certain situations, that works great, because in a high-end restaurant, or if you're a bartender, you can make a lot of money. But there are also situations where you might not even make minimum wage. To me, there's an opportunity here to make sure that those who aren't making minimum wage actually make minimum wage. It's called minimum wage for a reason. And then from there, there's no reason, this is not about taking the opportunity to receive tips away. It's about making sure that at the base, people are earning a minimum wage. It's a little complicated because the communication around it will be important. People may think, well, I don't need to tip anymore if I go to a restaurant. But there are situations where it makes an individual employee rather vulnerable, because if they are only working for tips, or that's the way they're going to get to minimum wage, they are much more vulnerable, and many of these workers are women. And so I believe that we should be ensuring that all employees make a minimum wage. And the implementation of this is something that needs to be done very carefully, because our hospitality industry, where most of the tipped wages exist, is so critically important to our district here, and that industry needs to continue to thrive. However, we also need to make sure that our workers are making a minimum wage.
Sue, New York State Department of Labor has held public hearings on the abolishment of the wage tip credit for tipped employees in New York State. What is your position on this issue?
That's an awesome question, Frank. Once again, the governor's on a mission, right? He's has these meetings all across the state on a Friday, except in the Hudson Valley. Not any one of the restaurant owners were able to attend, because how do you go on a Friday? That's your busiest time. You know, I lived here, I paid my mortgage by waitressing. I can't even imagine the burden that's going to be put on the restaurant owners. And think about it, you're going to have the restaurants forced to raise prices. They could even have kiosks like some of the fast food workers have now. So what does that do? That decreases jobs. That's so important. And you know, the amazing thing is I go in and I talk to a lot of the different restaurants and I talk to the staff, They have no clue that this is going on. Once again, it's the hidden agenda of the governor. And when it comes down to it, I agree, people need to make a living wage, but that goes back to having the trades. For many years, kids were encouraged to go to college, right? It's important. But some kids maybe aren't meant to go to college, but the trades pay awesome money. Try to find a mason or a plumber, a welder. That's huge. Those are the kind of things that we should be encouraging. We should not be putting the burden on the back of the small business owner. It keeps happening time and time again, and people are getting fed up. They want to move out of our area. We need to keep them here. So thank you for this awesome question.
Okay, Sue. New York continues to rank 49th in the Tax Foundation's list of the highest tax states to do business. We're among the most regulated and pay some of the highest rates in workers' compensation, minimum wage, penalties, state and local taxes, unfunded mandates, and fees. Businesses find it difficult to turn a profit and grow in this environment. As Senator, what can you do to foster further entrepreneurship and reduce the overwhelming burden on businesses?
I don't mind that I'm standing in the middle, but I can see everybody this way. When I looked at the business regulations, there's 140,000 pages of rules and regulations in New York State. That's ridiculous. This year, we were able, combined with last year, to cut back on $1 billion for workers' comp. That's a huge savings for our small businesses. It's a huge expense. And those are the kind of things, like I mentioned, the $4.2 billion tax cuts for our small businesses. We have to encourage our small businesses to stay here and thrive. I own a real estate business, and believe me, going through the recession, it was the toughest time for especially a real estate business. But you know what? I had to decide what I had to do, right? Smart, spending and cutting back. That's what the government should be doing too, and that will help each and every one of us. So thank you very much for the question.
Karen, New York continues to rank 49th in the Tax Foundation's list of highest tax states to do business. We're among the most regulated and pay some of the highest rates in workers' compensation, minimum wage, penalties, state and local taxes, unfunded mandates, and fees. Businesses find it difficult to turn a profit and grow in this environment. As Senator, what can you do to foster further entrepreneurship and reduce the overwhelming burden on businesses?
So I'll start by saying that I would imagine that anywhere in this country, anywhere in the world, it is not easy to run a business. Those of you who run a business know that no matter what is done in Albany, it will always be hard work, and that will stay the same. At CB Strain, I know when my grandfather was running the business, he was always working. When I was growing up, my father was always working. Saturday morning, he would take us on job sites so that we could check out the job. I'm not sure my sister and I were very helpful, but it's hard work to run a business, and you can be successful in New York. And so to say that no one is successful in New York is not the right way. It's also a little bit like Poughkeepsie. We need a little bit of loving in the city of Poughkeepsie. There's some great things going on in the city of Poughkeepsie. However, there are things that are burdens to businesses. As I mentioned earlier, there are laws that have unintended consequences. There are inefficiencies. There is some abuse of the system. We need to be looking at ways to stop that before it happens, because it's much cheaper to keep it from happening. Workers' compensation, for example. We need to make sure that people aren't abusing the system, but we need to make sure that they're not getting there in the first place. So that is something that really does need to be done, is to look at how we can take out some of the inefficiencies in the system, reduce some of the costs. We need to prioritize our spending. Taxes go for important things. It's for our roads, it's for our schools, it's for our police, for our firemen. We are always going to have taxes. However, the MTA tax in Dutchess County, really, we need to eliminate that. So those are some of the things. The one other thing I'll say in the 10 seconds I have, our current healthcare system is an unsustainable system. We need to reduce those costs and cover more people, because we can do it more efficiently than we're doing it now. That will be a significant reduction in burden to businesses.
Yeah.
One more. Despite deregulation, this is you, despite deregulation by the Department of Labor, New York State will continue to prohibit association health plans. By pooling our members together, the Chamber can leverage the marketplace for discounted health premiums, as was the case prior to the Affordable Care Act. Would you support legislation to allow for association health plans to drive down the cost of insurance premiums? Why or why not?
So I think that we need to do two things. The healthcare system that we have is really unsustainable. When I was running CB Strain, the salaried workers in the office, we provided them with excellent health insurance coverage. And every year, the prices went up double digits. And that was 10, 15 years ago. And it continues now. Because the Affordable Care Act put in a system and it's been being undercut since then. We need to take a step back and look at how we provide health insurance, and I would like to do it for the country, but I'm only focused on New York State. To me, the fact that the wealthiest nation in the world does not provide basic, quality, affordable health care to everyone is frankly shameful. Every other developed nation in this world does that, and we don't. You're taking away my time. This is a very serious issue. I think that this idea, I'd like to look at the specifics before I say that officially I would endorse that, but it sounds like a good one. But to me, it sounds like a Band-Aid on a much larger problem. And one of the issues in the Senate is you have 2 years. And that means that the incentive is to do the quick things, the easy things. What we need to do is we need to dig in and we need to wrestle with the difficult problem that we have the most inefficient way to provide health insurance to people. So people who don't have health insurance, for example, they wait until they're really, really sick, and then they go to the ER, and that is the most expensive way to care for someone. If we provided them with preventative care, we would do it on a much lower cost basis, and we could then perhaps cover everybody. And so there's a real program that and legislation that does exist, and we need to get to that. We really need to move forward because the healthcare system is not sustainable.
Sue, despite deregulation by the Department of Labor, New York State will continue to prohibit association health plans. By pooling our members together, the Chamber can leverage the marketplace for discounted health premiums, as was the case prior to the Affordable Care Act. Would you support legislation to allow for association health plans to drive down the cost of insurance premiums? Why or why not?
Thank you, Frank. You know, when you think about our healthcare costs, I hear from people all the time. Some people are paying between $1,600 a month and $2,300 a month. It's a huge burden. But when we think about reducing healthcare costs, I think we should focus instead on reducing waste and critically examining the health insurance mandates that drive costs. We have a healthcare cost and quality commission containment legislation, which that actually was with my bill was specifically for Lyme disease. It provides a mechanism to consider the price of insurance mandates on consumers, and we could do that for the whole healthcare system. But the Democrats in the Assembly and the governor continue to fight against the commission. The governor has not funded the commission, and the Assembly would not appoint its members, so the commission could not function because they know it would give New Yorkers a clear picture of how these mandates increase cost and impact the quality of our life. Examining these mandates would benefit businesses who continue to see higher and higher contributions for health insurance because of the increase in mandates. We need to invest in effective programs like fully funding EPIC, that's for elderly prescription coverage, which we also do. Since taking office, I've secured historic increases in funding for health initiatives like Alzheimer's, breast cancer, and Lyme disease. And one of the other things I just wanted to mention, I just lost my page, I'm sorry, but there was a nonpartisan report when you're talking about the New York Health Care Act that says that New York taxes would be increased by 156% to the system, an additional $139 billion on top of what you already pay. This is not the answer. We have to figure out the answer though, because we have to take care of people. That is a huge mandate. And according to the same nonpartisan report, it said if less than 1% of the state's highest taxpayers left the state, New York would lose over $30 billion in tax revenue, which could collapse the system. And also Vermont, which is about half the size of our state, they passed a healthcare system, and they were not able to implement it because they saw it wouldn't work. Oh, sorry, you're still taking your papers.
So Senator, will you support association plans, or will you not support association health plans? No, association health plans specifically. Like the chamber, for example, pooling together.
Yes, I agree. Pulling together, that makes a lot of sense. Sorry, I didn't answer the question.
Okay, Senator. Currently, there's a bill in Albany that will create single-payer health care system known as New York Health. It would provide health care to all New Yorkers without cost to the individual. Under this legislation, businesses would be responsible for picking up 80% of the cost burden. Do you support or oppose this legislation? If you support it, please explain why a government-run system is better than a free market system. If you do not support it, what solutions can you offer to lower healthcare premiums?
Sorry, I went off on a tangent on the last question because I thought that that's what Karen was talking about. But as I started to already answer that question, taxes would be increased by 156%. You see that, it's 80% on the business owner once again. New York taxpayers are stretched to the brink. We've all seen what happens when government bureaucrats run programs, and I can attest to that. Being in Albany, can you imagine? There was such dysfunction at the end of session this year, politics being played. We couldn't even get good bills going. Can you imagine if they ran healthcare? It would be horrible. While the system needs to be made more affordable, reform should happen at the federal level, not on a state-by-state basis, and that's why I mentioned with Vermont. They saw that they could not do it. And the bill makes no mention of who would qualify as a New York resident. So why wouldn't sick people come here and put immense strain on the system? And look at what we're doing right now with the hospital and Marist College. We're doing a medical school. That's amazing. We're gonna get some really great doctors, nurses here. It's awesome. Are they gonna wanna still come here if we're doing this on a state-by-state system? I don't believe that we can. It really needs to be done on a federal level. And the funny thing is, the governor never has an issue with spending our money. Well, he even said he doesn't see how the state could pay it. So there you go.
Karen, currently, there's a bill in Albany that will create a single-payer healthcare system known as New York Health. It would provide health care to all New Yorkers without the cost to the individual. Under this legislation, businesses would be responsible for picking up 80% of the cost burden. Do you support or oppose this legislation? If you support it, please explain why a government-run system is better than a free market system. If you do not support it, what solutions can you offer to lower healthcare premiums?
So thank you for this question. Because I mentioned earlier, I think healthcare is a fundamental issue, and the system that we have today is unsustainable. Healthcare is already a burden on businesses. For those of you who run a business, you know that. You need your employees to be well cared for. You need them not to be worried about whether or not they can go to the doctor and whether or not they can pay for the care that they need or the care that their children need. And so the single-payer healthcare, the New York Health Act, has a proposal to cover all New Yorkers and to do it in a way that is infinitely more efficient than we have today. There are also other studies that show that it will actually reduce the cost of providing care, and it will increase what's covered and cover more people. That sounds like a miracle, and it's easy to say, oh, that could never happen, and the government can never get it done because, of course, they never get anything right. I would say to you that we need to be bold, and we need to try, because to take the system that we have now and just assume that we can put a Band-Aid on it and we can just reduce what's required to be covered and say that that is a successful solution to this issue, I ask you, is it really better when you cover less and the price still goes up and you cover less people? I don't think so. And one of the reasons why I'm running for New York State Senate is I'm tired of people telling me, oh, you can't do that, and oh, government always gets it wrong. Well, maybe we need to get people into the government who know how to get it right, and let's do it right. Because our health care actually matters. I want to make sure that my neighbor's kid who struggles with a disease has all of the coverage that he needs to live the full life that he should be able to live. That's the community I want to live in.
We're now going to begin our closing statements. I now invite Senator Serino to begin with 3 minutes.
Okay, I want to first of all thank my family and friends in the chamber again, and also my husband's going to be watching this later. He had surgery 2 days ago, so unfortunately he's not able to be here, but my son is. You know, as you heard me say, Albany lives in a bubble. I was a single mom for a period of my life, living paycheck to paycheck, and I bring that with me every single day in Albany. Also, my background with being on the same party, Hyde Park Town Board, fought against my fellow Republican male members, and that's what led me to go to the Dutchess County Legislature, where again I fought legislation. So when the state senate asked me to run, I said, be careful what you wish for. Because I stand up in the corner of that room and I challenge the status quo. And just like I want to stand here and I see everybody, I want to see what they say. And I've had members say to me, go get them, Sue. It's a new day in Albany, you know, it's great because you need that fire in your belly. And it's been wonderful because they are starting to speak up more. Yeah, and like I said, I know what it's like to wonder if you'll be able to pay the bills or make payroll, and I think about that all the time. I understand the unique challenges we face here in our community because I live them and I never forget them. This year, only one seat in the state senate stands between a system of effective checks and balances and total one-party control. And you've also often heard me say, for me, it's never about an R or a D thing. I don't think anybody could ever put me in a box. I don't want to see one-party control on either side. But the last time that we were in this position of one-party control, we were hit with, and that was the Democratic control, it's based out of New York City. We were hit with over $14 billion in new taxes and fees, and the MTA payroll tax. And when you think about public schools, we talk about it, we had the gap elimination adjustment, $168 million that we finally were able to take care of. This year, we got a preview of things to come if we allow that to happen again, when the governor introduced his executive proposal, as I mentioned before, the $1 billion in taxes and fees and the $20 billion over the next few years. The Senate was the only one to not only reject those new taxes and fees, but to work to preserve the tax cuts that we depend on. Since day one, my door has been open. I have governed by listening, and I have always been open and honest with all of you. And you know what? I believe that you guys elected me because you believe in me, you trust me, and you know that I have your back. I'm not going to give you lip service. Sometimes I tell you things that you don't want to hear, but it's because I have to be responsible. When you talk about, you know, things like single pay or health care, yeah, it's great, we want to take care of everybody, but it's going to be on the back of each and every person in this room. We're going to drive people out of New York, but we do have to make a better system. So I'm always open to your questions, and if you give me the honor and the privilege of being your state senator again, you have that promise from me. Thank you, and God bless.
Now invite Ms. Smythe for her closing remarks.
There is so much that I'd like to do as your state senator. The healthcare system we have today is unsustainable. I do believe that healthcare should be available to all, affordably, and decoupled from employment, so everyone has greater freedom to change jobs or start new businesses. And businesses have the freedom to focus on their own business. I want to ensure that we all have health coverage regardless of pre-existing conditions, so that we can receive the treatment we need for whatever medical issue we may face, from tick-borne illnesses, to cancer, to mental health, to opioid addiction, without being faced with financial ruin. I want to support our public schools to make sure they are equitably and properly funded. and provide great opportunities to our children so they can find their pathway to success. I want to prepare our students for the jobs we have today and for the ones we want to bring here tomorrow. I want to support our workers who make our businesses run so they can earn living wages and be able to live productive lives and care for their families. Income inequality is growing worse. The community I want to live in is one where all people have opportunities to work hard and thrive. I want to find ways to encourage business development. Having run and been part of successful businesses, I know the challenges that we face and want to be a part of the solution to help make businesses thrive while at the same time ensuring worker safety and ethical standards. As your state senator, I will fight to protect our environment. Clean water and clean air must not be taken for granted. For too long, many have ignored and even worse, misrepresented our impact on the environment. For my kids' sake and for your kids' sake, that has to end. And finally, while some like to claim that it is settled law, women's reproductive rights are in jeopardy. And the solution for New Yorkers is waiting for us in Albany. Our solution is awaiting action by the state Senate. I support the Reproductive Health Act because I want to ensure that New York women continue to have the right to privacy and control of their own reproductive health choices. I would also just like to add that 50 of the last 53 years have been under Republican Senate control. When you send me to Albany, I will be a fighter for Hudson Valley families and business. I hope that you support my vision for Dutchess and Putnam counties in November, and that you won't hesitate to reach out to me from one business person to another to share your ideas and concerns. Thank you for your time this morning, and thank you again to the Chamber for hosting this important event.
So on behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to once again thank both of these candidates for taking time to